The red sky burned like fire over the broken world of Epsilon 4. Explosions echoed across the horizon and the air was thick with dust and smoke. The ground trembled under the weight of machines, and every breath carried the metallic taste of war. Among the ruins of what was once a great Zilari city, Sergeant Daniel Cross, a human soldier, moved carefully through the destruction. His armor was scratched, his helmet cracked, and his rifle low on power. Yet he kept going. His mission was simple: search for survivors after the orbital strike and record any remaining enemy technology. But Daniel had seen too much war to believe in simple missions anymore. Everywhere he looked, the battlefield spoke of loss, broken ships, shattered domes, and silence where life once lived. The Zilari were alien in shape but not in heart. They fought hard for their home, and Daniel respected that. He had seen their families running during the attacks, clutching their children just as humans did. He moved through the fog, his boots crunching over glass and debris. The scanner on his wrist beeped softly, faint life signs ahead. Daniel lifted his rifle, his body tense. He expected an enemy soldier, maybe a wounded fighter trying to ambush him. He stepped closer to a fallen Zilari craft, its metallic wings half buried in the ground. Flames flickered weakly from the wreckage. The scanner beeped again, closer now, right inside the cockpit. Daniel gripped the edge and pulled. A burst of hot air hit his face, followed by a small trembling sound. It wasn't the hiss of a weapon or the growl of a dying soldier. It was a whimper. He froze. Slowly he leaned in. There, under twisted metal and glass, was a small alien child. Her skin was pale blue, her eyes large and filled with tears. She was no older than 8, maybe 10 by human measure. Her tiny hands clutched a glowing pendant around her neck. The sight broke something inside Daniel. He knelt and spoke softly through his helmet, his voice calm. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The girl flinched, pressing back against the wreckage. Her voice came out broken and scared. "Please, don't hurt me." Daniel set his rifle aside and removed his helmet, showing his face. His brown eyes were tired but kind. "See, I'm human." "My name is Daniel. I won't hurt you. I promise." For a moment, the girl just stared. Then, with shaking fingers, she reached out, touching his face carefully as if making sure he was real. "Human," she whispered. "Yes," Daniel said with a small smile. "And what's your name?" "Lyra," she said quietly, still clutching the glowing pendant. Daniel noticed that the pendant projected a faint hologram, a woman's face, alien but beautiful, eyes full of sorrow. The image flickered weakly before fading out. "Your mother?" Daniel asked. The little girl nodded, her voice trembling. She's looking for me." Daniel looked around. The ship was completely destroyed. Whoever had been with her was gone. He swallowed hard, feeling a deep ache inside. He thought of his own little sister back on Earth, how she used to wait at the window every time he went on duty. He couldn't leave this child here. Daniel took a deep breath. "Okay, Lyra, I'm going to get you out of here, all right? You're safe with me." She looked at him, uncertain, her eyes wet. "But you're human. You fight us." Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes, but not today. Today I'm just someone who wants to help." He carefully lifted the wreckage piece by piece until Lyra could crawl out. She was light as a feather and weak from exhaustion. Daniel wrapped her in his field jacket and checked his scanner again. The air was full of radiation and falling debris. He had to move fast. As he carried her away from the crash, explosions echoed behind them. Other ships falling, other battles raging. Lyra buried her face against his armor, shivering. "Don't look back," Daniel said softly. "We're going home." "Where is home?" she asked in a tiny voice. Daniel paused. He wasn't sure what to tell her. His home was far away in a blue planet she had never seen. Her home was here, now destroyed. Maybe home wasn't a place anymore. Maybe it was just where someone cared. He kept walking. "Home is wherever you're safe, Lyra." They reached the edge of a ruined valley by nightfall. The light of twin moons shone through the dust clouds, casting a silver glow on the broken land. Daniel found a half-collapsed building, enough to give them shelter. He set up a small heater and rationed his last packet of food. Lyra sat quietly watching the fire. Daniel tore the ration in half and handed it to her. She looked surprised. "You share with me?" He smiled faintly. "Of course. You need it more than I do." Her small hands trembled as she took the food. "You are kind, Not like others. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't want to think about what other humans had done in this war. He just wanted to make sure she survived the night. Lyra slowly opened her pendant again. The hologram flickered, showing her mother, the alien queen, crying as she held a piece of cloth that looked like Lyra's scarf. The child's eyes filled with tears. "I want to go to her," she whispered. "But I don't know how." Daniel's heart tightened. He didn't know how either. He was deep in enemy territory, far from the human lines. Returning her to her people would be seen as betrayal. But how could he abandon her? He reached out, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. "We'll find her, Lyra, I promise." She looked up at him, her small face lit by the heater's glow. "Promise?" "Promise," he said firmly. As the night grew colder, Daniel adjusted the heater and checked the perimeter sensors. The wind howled outside, carrying distant sounds of battle. Inside, Lyra finally fell asleep, her head resting against his arm. Daniel sat beside her, staring into the small fire. He felt something he hadn't felt in years, a reason to care. The war had taken everything from him, friends, peace, hope. But now this tiny alien child had brought back a spark of humanity he thought was gone. He whispered quietly to himself, "I'll get you home, kid, no matter what it takes." Outside, the stars shone faintly through the dust, cold and distant yet somehow comforting. Morning came with a pale light and silence. Daniel woke to find Lyra drawing in the dirt with a stick. Small pictures of stars, ships, and two figures standing together, one tall and armored, one small with a glowing pendant. Daniel smiled. "Is that us?" Lyra nodded shyly. "You saved me," he laughed softly. "Not yet, but I will." As he prepared his gear, he thought about what lay ahead: enemy patrols, radiation storms, and a long journey across a dying world. But he also thought about the hologram of the Queen, a mother crying for her child. Maybe there was still a chance to end this war in a different way. Not through guns or bombs, but through something simpler, a single act of kindness. He picked up his rifle, checked his compass, and looked down at Lyra. "Let's move out, little one." She took his hand without hesitation, and as they walked into the red sunrise, the war around them seemed to pause for just a heartbeat, as if the universe itself was watching this small human soldier carry hope through the ashes. The next day on Epsilon 4 began with a dull red sunrise. The dust-filled sky glowed faintly and the air was cold. Sergeant Daniel Cross adjusted the straps of his armor and checked the small alien child walking beside him. Her name was Lyra, and she was wrapped in his jacket, her pendant softly glowing on her chest. They had a long journey ahead, through the ruins of a destroyed city, across dangerous lands filled with both human and alien patrols. Daniel knew it would not be easy, but he had made a promise. He would get her home. As they walked through the ruins, Lyra's small feet left prints in the gray dust. She looked around at the broken towers and fallen ships. Her large eyes were filled with sadness. "This was my city," she said softly. "It was beautiful before the war." Daniel glanced around. The tall glass buildings were shattered and alien plants grew between the cracks. "I believe you," he said gently. "War changes everything." She looked up at him. "Why do humans fight us?" Daniel hesitated. He wanted to tell her the truth, but how could he explain something even adults didn't fully understand? Finally, he said, "Sometimes people are afraid of what they don't understand, and fear makes them fight." Lyra was silent for a moment, then whispered, "I don't want to fight." Daniel smiled sadly. "Me neither." By afternoon, they reached the edge of the city. Daniel used his scanner. No human signals nearby, but radiation levels were rising. He found an underground tunnel that led toward the old Zelari transport routes. Inside the tunnel, it was dark and cold. Daniel switched on his helmet light. The walls were covered with alien symbols glowing faintly. Lyra traced them with her fingers. "It's my people's writing," she said. "It says hope will return with the stars." Daniel paused. "That's beautiful," she nodded, smiling faintly. "My mother says those words." Hearing her speak about her mother made Daniel's heart tighten. He had seen the hologram from her pendant, the alien queen's face full of pain. It was clear the queen loved her daughter deeply. He looked down at Lyra and said softly, "She must be very brave." "She is," Lyra replied proudly. But she cries at night when she thinks I can't see. Daniel's heart ached. Even though they were from different worlds, the feelings were the same. Love, fear, loss. As they continued through the tunnels, a sudden rumble shook the ground. Daniel stopped. "Stay behind me," he said quickly. From the darkness ahead came the sound of metal scraping and mechanical steps. A human recon drone appeared, a hovering machine with red scanning lights. Daniel cursed under his breath. "Stay quiet, Lyra." He pulled her behind a wall as the drone floated closer. The machine scanned the area, its sensors humming. If it detected them, it would call in an airstrike. Daniel waited, his hand gripping his rifle tightly. Lyra looked terrified. He gently touched her hand, giving a reassuring nod. The drone hovered for a moment, then turned away, moving deeper into the tunnel. Daniel exhaled. "That was close," Lyra whispered. "It looked scary." He smiled faintly. "It was, but we're still here, aren't we?" She nodded and tried to smile too. They moved on until they found an exit that led into a valley filled with twisted metal and broken ships. The sun was sinking now, painting the world in shades of red and gold. Daniel built a small campfire under the shadow of a fallen Zalari transport. He gave Lyra some water and a piece of ration bread. She chewed slowly, looking thoughtful. After a while, she said, "You could leave me, you know. You could go back to your people." Daniel stared at the flames. "I could," he said. "But I won't." "Why?" she asked softly. He looked at her and smiled. "Because I made a promise. And humans don't break promises." Lyra tilted her head. "Even if it's hard?" "Especially when it's hard," he said quietly. She looked at him for a long time, then reached out and placed her small hand over his. "Then I trust you." Her words hit him deeper than she knew. That night, a storm rolled across the wasteland. Cold wind howled and lightning lit up the sky. Daniel covered the fire and pulled Lyra close to keep her warm. She clung to him, shivering. "Tell me a story," she whispered, "about your home." Daniel thought for a moment, then smiled. "All right. My home is a planet called Earth. It has blue oceans, green forests, and white snow on tall mountains. At night, you can see millions of stars. We have cities full of lights and people laugh in the streets. And there's music everywhere." Lyra's eyes widened. "It sounds beautiful." "It is," Daniel said softly. "One day maybe you'll see it," she smiled sleepily. "If my mother lets me," Daniel chuckled. "I'll talk to her." Lyra giggled, then yawned. "You're funny." He watched her fall asleep, her tiny form curled up against his chest. The pendant around her neck glowed softly, casting a warm light over both of them. Daniel stared at the stars through the cracks in the wreckage. For the first time in years, he felt peace, and even in the middle of war. When morning came, Daniel used his communicator to check for signals. The device crackled weakly, but one channel picked up fragments of alien transmission. He heard a voice repeating something, words in the Zalari language. Lyra's eyes widened when she heard it. "That's my mother's voice." Daniel handed her the communicator. The signal was broken, but a single word was clear. "Lyra." "It's her," the girl cried. "She's calling for me." Daniel's heart pounded. "Then we'll answer." He boosted the signal, trying to trace the source. The scanner marked a location on the northern ridge, far beyond human-controlled territory. To reach it, they would have to cross no man's land, a deadly stretch patrolled by both armies. He looked at Lyra. "It's far and dangerous," she nodded firmly. "I'm not afraid," Daniel smiled. "That's my girl." He didn't realize until then how much he had begun to care for her, not as a mission but as someone he had to protect. As they began their journey again, the land grew harsher. Craters filled with dark water, smoke rising from the distance. They walked for hours, taking cover whenever they heard engines overhead. At one point, they found the remains of an old human supply drop. Daniel scavenged what he could: a new energy cell, a first aid kit, and a few ration bars. When he handed one to Lyra, she said, "You always give me food first." He grinned. "That's what adults do," she smiled. "Then you're a good adult," he laughed, shaking his head. "I try." By late afternoon, they reached a wide field covered in silver dust. The horizon burned orange under the setting sun. Lyra stopped suddenly and pointed. "Look!" Daniel turned. In the distance stood a ruined Zalari monument, its surface engraved with glowing symbols. At its base, a holographic statue flickered. an image of the Queen holding a child. Lyra ran forward, tears in her eyes. "It's us." "It's me and my mother." Daniel approached slowly. The statue shimmered, then played a recording. A soft voice in Zalari, calm and full of love. Lyra translated through tears. She says, "Even if the stars fall, I will find you." "My heart knows your light." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "She's still looking for you, Lyra. She hasn't given up." Lyra turned to him, her eyes full of hope. "Then we must go to her." Daniel nodded. "Yes. Tomorrow we cross no man's land." That night, as they rested under the monument, Lyra held her pendant close. The hologram flickered again. The Queen's face appeared, clearer this time. Daniel watched silently. The Queen's expression was filled with sadness and strength. Lyra whispered, "She's waiting for me." Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. "And I'll make sure she sees you again." The wind howled across the field, carrying the distant echo of gunfire. But beneath that sound, another whisper seemed to fill the air, something soft and almost gentle, like a promise written in the stars. The next morning came quietly over the gray wasteland. The twin suns rose slowly above the broken hills, their light filtering through thick clouds of dust. Sergeant Daniel Cross opened his tired eyes and sat up, feeling the weight of the long journey pressing on his body. Beside him, Lyra, the small alien child he had rescued, was already awake. She was drawing in the dust again, sketching stars and small shapes of ships. When she noticed him watching, she smiled shyly. "Good morning, Daniel." "Morning, little one," he replied with a tired smile. "Ready to walk again?" She nodded eagerly, her pendant glowing faintly on her chest. Daniel checked his map and compass. Their destination, the coordinates where Lyra's mother's signal had come from, was still far away, across a deadly stretch known as No Man's Land. It was an open area filled with wreckage, craters, and patrols from both sides. Many who entered never came out again, but Daniel had no choice. He had made a promise. They started their journey early, moving through the ruins of a burned forest. The trees, twisted and black, looked like silent ghosts. Every step echoed softly in the empty land. Lyra stayed close, her small hand gripping Daniel's armored glove. She looked around nervously. "Is this where your people fought?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, this was one of the first battlefields." She touched a piece of melted metal lying on the ground. "So much pain everywhere," she whispered. Daniel said nothing. He had seen too many places like this, where silence felt heavier than noise. After a few hours of walking, they reached a broken bridge hanging over a deep canyon. The wind whistled through the gaps. The bridge looked unstable, but it was the only path forward. Daniel tested the first plank carefully. It creaked but held. "Stay right behind me," he told Lyra. She nodded, her eyes wide with fear. Step by step, they crossed the bridge. The old metal groaned under their weight. Halfway across, a loud crack echoed. One of the support cables snapped, and the bridge tilted dangerously. "Hold on," Daniel shouted, grabbing Lyra's hand as the floor gave way beneath them. For a terrifying moment, they dangled over the canyon, the wind howling around them. Lyra cried out, her small fingers slipping. "Daniel, I've got you," he yelled, pulling her up with all his strength. His muscles burned, but he didn't let go. Inch by inch, he dragged them both onto a stable section of the bridge. When they finally reached the other side, both collapsed, breathing heavily. Lyra looked at him with tearful eyes. "You saved me again." Daniel smiled weakly. "Guess I'm getting good at that." She giggled softly, wiping her tears. Even in fear, her laughter sounded like music in the middle of war. As they continued walking, the land began to change. The ground turned black and glassy, melted by years of energy blasts. Strange glowing crystals grew out of the soil. The air smelled of ozone and ash. Daniel checked his scanner. "Radiation levels are high. We'll need to move fast." Lyra looked up at the glowing sky. "It's beautiful." "But sad," Daniel nodded. "Yeah, like a painting made from pain." They walked quietly for hours until they found shelter inside the remains of an old transport ship. Inside, Daniel repaired a small solar panel to power his communicator. Lyra helped him by holding tools, her tiny fingers careful and steady. "You're a good helper," Daniel said. She smiled proudly. "Mother always said I'm smart. She taught me how to fix small machines." Daniel looked surprised. "She did?" "That's impressive," Lyra nodded. She says knowledge keeps us alive, he laughed softly. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She is, Lyra said softly. And she'll be so happy to see me. Her words filled the air with warmth, but Daniel couldn't shake the thought that they were still deep inside enemy territory. He didn't know if he could really get her there safely. Yet every time he looked at her hopeful face, his doubts faded. He had seen too many soldiers lose hope. But this little girl, she was hope. That night, they camped near the edge of no man's land. Daniel sat awake, watching the distant flashes of battle on the horizon. Lyra slept beside him, holding his jacket like a blanket. The soft hum of her pendant filled the air. He whispered to himself, "One more day, kid. Just one more day." Suddenly, the sound of engines broke the silence. Daniel froze. Through the smoke, bright lights appeared. Human scout drones flying low, searching the ground. He quickly covered the fire and lifted Lyra into his arms. "Quiet now," he whispered. They ran through the ruins, crouching behind rocks and broken walls. The drone scanned the area with red beams. One beam passed inches from Daniel's leg. He pressed Lyra against his chest, shielding her with his body. The red light moved away, but then a loud beep sounded. The drone had detected movement. "Run!" Daniel shouted. They sprinted toward a ditch as the drone fired small explosive rounds. The ground burst behind them, sending dust and smoke everywhere. Daniel leaped into the ditch, covering Lyra with his armor as explosions roared above. When it finally stopped, everything was silent again. Lyra looked up at him, her face pale. "They almost got us." Daniel nodded, breathing heavily. "Yeah, but almost doesn't count," she smiled weakly. "You always protect me." He touched her pendant gently. "That's my job." The next morning, they reached the edge of no man's land, a vast open plain filled with craters, smoke, and the remains of both human and Zalari machines. The air shimmered with heat and radiation. Daniel crouched and scanned the area. "We'll have to move fast. There's no cover out there." Lyra looked nervous but nodded bravely. "I can do it," he smiled proudly. "That's the spirit." They began running, moving from crater to crater, trying to stay low. The sun burned overhead and the ground was hot enough to melt metal. Halfway across, Daniel's scanner beeped again. "Zalari patrol incoming." Alien walkers appeared from the north, tall machines with glowing blue weapons. Daniel muttered under his breath, "Great, just what we needed." He lifted Lyra and ran toward a wrecked ship for cover. Laser fire scorched the ground behind them. The noise was deafening. Inside the wreckage, Daniel returned fire with his rifle, trying to draw attention away from Lyra. She hid behind a metal crate, clutching her pendant. "Daniel," she cried. "They're too many." "I know," he shouted, firing again. "Just stay down." One of the alien walkers turned its weapon toward their position. Daniel prepared for the worst, but before it fired, a strange pulse burst from Lyra's pendant. A wave of light spread across the battlefield, short-circuiting the machines. The walkers froze, their lights flickering and dying. The battlefield fell silent. Daniel stared in shock. "What was that?" Lyra looked at her pendant, eyes wide. "It's my mother's link. She must be close." Daniel's heart pounded. Then we're almost there. They moved quickly, using the confusion to escape. In the distance, the sky began to glow, a sign of alien ships landing beyond the ridge. Lyra pointed, tears in her eyes. "That's her. My mother's fleet." Daniel smiled with relief. "Then let's finish this." They reached the ridge as the night fell again. From the top, they could see hundreds of Zalari soldiers below, but not fighting. They were gathering, waiting. Lyra held Daniel's hand tightly. "We made it," he nodded, feeling both pride and exhaustion. "We did." As they prepared to climb down, Daniel saw something on his scanner. Human signals approaching fast from behind. "His old unit," he sighed quietly. "Looks like my side's here too." Lyra looked up, confused. "Is that bad?" Daniel smiled softly. "It's complicated." He looked at the glowing alien camp below, then at the approaching humans. The hardest part was yet to come. But he wasn't afraid anymore. He had crossed fire, storms, and war zones for a promise. And tomorrow he would keep it. High above the alien city, golden light reflected off the towering spires of the Zalari Palace. The Queen's private observation deck overlooked her lands, but the emptiness of the streets below mirrored the emptiness she felt inside. Queen Sakara. ruler of the Zilari Empire, sat silently on her throne, her long fingers curled over the edge of her seat. Her usual aura of strength was replaced by something rarer: grief. The holographic image of her daughter flickered in front of her, the last message she had received. Her heart ached every time she saw it. Her daughter Lyra had been missing for weeks. Rumors said she had been captured by human forces during the orbital strike on their city. Many advisors whispered that the child was gone, but Sakara refused to believe it. "She is alive," the queen whispered. "I can feel her spirit in the stars." Her generals bowed. "Your Majesty, we must prepare the fleet. The human soldier responsible will be intercepted." Sakara shook her head. "No, prepare a landing zone. I want to see him first. If he lies, I will deal with him. But if he speaks true, then he has done what no warrior has done before." The generals exchanged uneasy glances. They had never heard the queen speak of mercy, let alone curiosity. But they obeyed. Far below, Sergeant Daniel Cross crouched behind a ridge, watching the golden lights of the alien fleet land on the horizon. His arm throbbed from the injury he had sustained while crossing no man's land. Lyra clutched his good arm, her small fingers trembling with excitement and fear. "Daniel, is that my mother?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He nodded. "Yes, that's her. Stay close, Lyra." She looked up at him, eyes wide. "Will she be angry?" Daniel smiled softly. "She might be, but we'll explain everything. You're safe, and that's what matters." He could see human troops approaching behind them. His old squad, the men he had trained with, were advancing, weapons ready. They did not know Lyra's identity or why Daniel had risked his life for her. Daniel sighed. "Well, we're going to need a little courage for this part." Lyra squeezed his hand. "I have courage, if you have it too," Daniel chuckled. "Good, then let's go." As they descended the ridge toward the palace, Daniel's heart raced. Human soldiers noticed them immediately. "Cross, stop!" shouted one of his former comrades. "You're returning an enemy child. You'll be court-martialed." Daniel raised his hands, keeping Lyra behind him. "Not today. Today I'm keeping a promise." The soldiers hesitated, unsure of what to do. Their orders conflicted with the obvious innocence of the child and the authority of the approaching Queen's fleet. Then the first of the Zilari ships landed nearby. The ground shook as the Queen herself emerged, flanked by her guards. Her presence was overwhelming, tall, regal, and filled with a silent command that made even the human soldiers pause. Daniel instinctively stepped forward. "Your Majesty," he said respectfully, I brought her back as promised." The Queen's eyes narrowed slightly. She studied him for a long moment. Then she looked down at her daughter, who had begun to run toward her, laughing and crying at the same time. "Lyra!" the Queen cried, tears forming in her eyes. She knelt and opened her arms. Lyra leapt into them, sobbing. "Mom, I'm back! He saved me!" Sakara hugged her tightly, holding her daughter as though she would never let go. Around them, guards lowered their weapons and human soldiers watched silently, unsure of what to do. Daniel remained standing a few steps back, bleeding and exhausted. His chest rose and fell as he struggled to catch his breath. The Queen noticed him and studied his condition. The scratches, the bruises, the blood. "You," she said softly, pointing at him. "You are the human who risked everything for my child?" Daniel bowed slightly. "Yes, Your Majesty. I promised her safety, and I kept that promise." Sakara's gaze softened. "Why?" Daniel straightened. "Because that's what humans do. We don't need to understand your kind to know what love looks like." The Queen studied him in silence. The child in her arms looked up and smiled at Daniel. "He is my hero," Lyra whispered. For the first time in her reign, Sakara felt gratitude for a human. She had spent years preparing for war, training soldiers and planning battles. She had not imagined that a human's act of kindness could achieve what diplomacy and treaties never could. "Bring him forward," she commanded her guards. Daniel approached cautiously, his heart pounding. The human soldiers who had followed him remained silent, unsure whether to intervene. Even they were in awe of the scene unfolding before them. The Queen held out her hand. Daniel hesitated for a moment and then stepped forward. Sakara placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of acknowledgement, respect, and unspoken trust. "You have done what no soldier has done," she said softly. "You have crossed the battlefield, risked your life, and returned my daughter to me." Daniel bowed his head. "I only did what anyone should do." No child deserves to be lost. The Queen's eyes filled with tears. You honor your people today, human. Perhaps there is hope for both our worlds after all. Meanwhile, Lyra hugged both of them, caught between the two people who had saved her life, her brave mother and the human who had carried her through fire. The air grew quiet as both armies paused. Human soldiers and Zilari guards watched the reunion, realizing the power of compassion over conflict. For a moment, the battlefield seemed to vanish. Then, Daniel felt a hand on his shoulder, one of the human commanders. "Cross, what have you done?" he asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and admiration. Daniel smiled faintly. "I did what I promised. That child is safe. That's enough," the commander shook his head. "You've crossed lines. But I see now. Maybe it was worth it." Skara stepped closer to Daniel. "Human soldier, you could have been killed, captured, or worse. Yet you came here because of a promise. That is courage. That is honor. That is humanity." Daniel felt something swell in his chest. It was not pride or victory, but the quiet joy of knowing he had done the right thing. Lyra pulled on her mother's robe. "Mom, can he stay for a little while?" "Please." The Queen looked down at Daniel. He chuckled softly. "I'd be honored, Your Majesty." Skara smiled faintly. "Perhaps you shall." For the first time, peace felt possible. The story of a human soldier who had returned an alien child to her mother spread quickly through the palace, through the fleet, and across the battlefield. Soldiers on both sides whispered about what they had seen. A human and an alien child walking through fire and danger, a queen reunited with her daughter, and a war momentarily paused by courage and love. Daniel sat nearby, cleaning his wounds, while Lyra showed her mother the small trinkets and drawings she had carried across the wasteland. The Queen listened, smiling gently, tears in her eyes, marveling at the resilience of her daughter and the bravery of the human soldier. Daniel caught a glance from Lyra. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" he asked. "For not leaving me," she said. Daniel smiled, ruffling her hair. "That's what heroes do." That night, as the stars shone over the Zilari palace, Daniel looked up. The moons reflected on the golden spires, and the pendant around Lyra's neck glowed softly, projecting the image of the Queen's loving face. He thought about the journey ahead, the challenges of peace, the distrust between two worlds and the role he might play. But for now, he let himself rest, knowing that the promise he made had been fulfilled. Queen Sakara sat nearby, holding her daughter. She looked at Daniel with gratitude and respect, a bond forming that went beyond war, species, or politics. In that moment, the battlefield was no longer just a place of war. It was a place where courage, compassion, and humanity could change everything. And across the stars, the message was clear. Even in a universe full of conflict, one human soldier could remind two worlds that kindness is stronger than fear. The sun rose over the Zilari homeworld, golden light spilling across the palace spires. The city below stirred as word spread quickly. A human soldier had returned the Queen's daughter safely. Every street, every alley, and every hovering platform seemed to hum with the news. Sergeant Daniel Cross sat quietly at the edge of the landing zone, his armor battered and his body sore from the long journey. Beside him, Lyra held her mother's hand tightly, eyes wide with joy and tears streaming down her face. "Mom, I'm back. He saved me," she cried, throwing herself into Queen Sakara's arms. The Queen lowered herself to the ground to embrace her daughter. Tears streaked her face as she held Lyra close, murmuring words in their language full of love and relief. The gold and silver of her armor glinted in the morning sun, but for that moment all of it was forgotten. She was simply a mother holding her lost child again. Daniel watched silently, his heart swelling with quiet pride. Every step of the journey, every danger they faced, every moment of fear. It had all led to this. Once the initial reunion ended, the Queen rose and turned toward Daniel. Her eyes, once stern and commanding, were now softened by gratitude. "You," she said softly, "human soldier, you have done what no other could." Daniel stood straight, bowing slightly. "I did what anyone should do, Your Majesty. I promised her safety." That was all. The Queen studied him for a long moment. Then she extended her hand in a gesture of honor, a gesture no human or Zilari had ever shared before. "You honor yourself, your people, and even mine. You have crossed the lines of war for something greater than victory. You have shown the universe The power of humanity. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. It wasn't about glory. It was about keeping a promise. Lyra tugged on his sleeve. See, you're my hero too. He chuckled softly. That's a lot of titles for one guy. Around them, the atmosphere shifted. Solari soldiers who had been tense and alert now lowered their weapons. Human soldiers, still unsure of what to do, also paused. For the first time, both sides saw not enemies but the result of courage, trust, and compassion. The Queen turned to her guards. Prepare the council chamber. Today we meet as allies, not enemies. Today a human has shown what can be achieved when hearts guide action instead of weapons. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. Peace talks between humans and Zalari had always been difficult. Years of mistrust, battle, and fear. But if his journey could bring even a small step toward understanding, it would be worth it. Lyra squeezed his hand. Do you think we can really be friends? Daniel smiled. Yes, kid. If we can survive what we just did, we can survive anything. She giggled, letting go of his hand to hug him again. Thank you, Daniel. For everything. He ruffled her hair. No thanks needed. You just have to promise me one thing. What? She asked. Keep being brave, he said simply. Later that day, inside the palace council chamber, humans and Zalari leaders sat together, some reluctantly, others in quiet amazement. At the center was Daniel, sitting beside Lyra, while the Queen presided over the gathering. This human soldier, Skara announced, her voice echoing with authority, risked life and limb to return my daughter to me. He has proven that compassion can cross the deepest divides. Let this act be a reminder that even in the darkest times, humanity and honor can guide us toward peace. Murmurs filled the chamber. Some human delegates exchanged glances, unsure if this was diplomacy or spectacle. Solari leaders whispered among themselves, many visibly moved. Daniel kept his eyes on Lyra, who sat proudly beside him. He knew the path to lasting peace would be long and difficult, but for the first time, he believed it was possible. That evening, as the golden sun set over the city, Daniel was invited to dine with the Queen and her daughter. The meal was simple, but for Daniel it was rich in meaning. Lyra chattered excitedly about the journey, the dangers they had overcome, and the moments they had laughed despite fear. Queen Sakara listened with quiet joy, occasionally asking Daniel questions about human worlds and customs. The exchange was filled with curiosity, respect, and a sense of shared humanity. At one point, Lyra leaned over to Daniel. You know, my mother says you are brave, but I think you're even more than that. You're kind. That's something not everyone can do. Daniel smiled, feeling warmth spread through his chest. That's high praise coming from the bravest girl I know. She hugged him tightly. I'll never forget you, Daniel, ever. As night fell, Daniel walked outside, looking up at the stars. 2 moons reflected off the glass and metal of the palace, but above them all, the heavens stretched endlessly. He thought about the battlefield, the journey across fire and danger, and the promises that had guided him. Each challenge had tested him, but each had also proven something, that courage, love, and determination could overcome fear, hate, and war. He felt a quiet satisfaction, not for medals or recognition, but because a promise had been kept, a child had been returned to her mother, and a seed of peace had been planted. From the palace, Lyra's voice called out softly, Daniel, come see. He followed her to a balcony where the Queen stood with her daughter. Lyra held the pendant in her hand, showing it glowing brighter than ever before. This is our link, she explained. Even when we're apart, it reminds us of hope, love, and bravery. And now you're part of it too. Daniel smiled, looking at the glowing symbol of family, courage, and unity. I'm honored, he said simply. Days later, news spread across both human and Zalari territories. The story of the human who brought a child home became legend. Children in both worlds whispered about the soldier who risked everything for someone not his own. Leaders discussed peace with renewed hope. And for Daniel, the greatest reward was simple, seeing Lyra safe with her mother and knowing he had made a difference. One morning, as Daniel prepared to return to the human fleet, Lyra ran to him. Wait, take this, she said, handing him a small pendant like hers. It's glowing, Daniel said, examining it. Yes, she said, so we never forget each other. You're part of our family now. He smiled and clipped it to his belt. I'll never forget you either, Lyra, and I'll always keep my promises. Queen Skara approached him. Your actions will not be forgotten, Sergeant Cross. The universe has shown that one human can change the course of history. You are an example of what humanity truly is, courageous, compassionate, and honorable. Daniel bowed his head humbly. Thank you, Your Majesty. I only did what anyone would do. She smiled faintly, a rare warmth in her eyes. Perhaps, but few have the heart to do it. As he boarded his shuttle back to human territory, Daniel looked out at the Zalari city one last time. The golden spires reflected the light of the rising suns, and Lyra waved from the balcony with her mother beside her. He whispered quietly, "Mission accomplished. Promise kept." The shuttle lifted, breaking the atmosphere. Below, the city and its people began to stir with hope, inspired by a single act of bravery and kindness. Daniel turned to the stars, feeling the weight of the universe and the smallness of a single life, yet the vast power of a single act. Across two worlds, the story would be told for generations, of a human soldier, an alien queen, and a lost child reunited against all odds and far away. As the shuttle streaked through the heavens, Lyra's voice echoed softly in his mind. "Mom, I'm back." "He saved me!" A simple statement, yet it carried the weight of hope, love, and the power of humanity. The message that one act of courage could shine brighter than any war.